Snow fell softly over Willow Creek that morning, the kind of quiet snowfall that made every sound feel distant. Inside, the maple and steam diner warmth battled the cold through the smell of roasted coffee, and waffles browned just enough to taste like comfort. The windows fogged from the heat, muting the world beyond. Lena Brooks moved between tables with her usual poise, balancing mugs and plates, while her ponytail swayed behind her. Her smile, gentle but tired, amid the exhaustion that came from holding her life together since her mother's passing last winter. Her father had left long ago, leaving Lena to raise her younger brother Ben, 16, bright and deaf, but always attuned to the emotions around him. He washed dishes in the back, humming tunelessly, while Lena refilled coffee for old Mr. Dawson, who came every morning just to talk about the weather. When the doorbell chimed, Ben looked up. A man entered, tall shoulders, broad under a black coat that had seen too many seasons. A faint scar marked his left temple. He walked like someone who used to command rooms but had forgotten how. He sat by the window, away from the crowd, and nodded when Lena poured him coffee. He spoke barely above a whisper, "Black, please." His voice carried a sadness that lingered in the air even after he stopped talking. She noticed his hands strong, calloused, restless. He kept glancing outside as though searching for something he had lost long ago. The diner's jukebox played a faded country song, a melody about second chances. Outside the snow thickened and inside time seemed to slow. For a while, no one paid him any mind until the door opened again, bringing with it the sound of boots and authority. Sheriff Garth and Deputy Moore entered their presence sharp as cold steel. Conversations died mid-sentence. Lena's stomach tightened. She had seen Garth pull this act before, loud, performative, always looking for someone to remind who was in charge. His gaze swept the diner until it found the stranger by the window. He smirked and whispered something to Moore, then walked over. "Morning, stranger," he said, voice dripping with mock politeness. "Got some ID?" The man looked up slowly, his calm almost unnerving. "Just having coffee," he said, quiet but firm. Moore tilted his head. "We've had complaints. Folks say you've been hanging around too long." The man didn't answer. He lifted his cup, took a slow sip, eyes steady on the sheriff. Garth's smirk faded. "You think ignoring me makes you invisible?" He reached out and clamped a hand on the man's shoulder. The scrape of the chair against the floor made everyone flinch. Lena froze behind the counter, towel in hand, her heart pounding in her ears. It would be easier to stay quiet. Everyone always stayed quiet. But something inside her twisted. Something her mother once called the part of you that refuses to look away. She put down the towel and walked forward. "He's a paying customer, Sheriff. You're scaring people." Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. Every eye in the room turned to her. Garth turned too, disbelief crossing his face. "Go back to your shift, sweetheart," he said loud enough for laughter to bubble from Moore. Lena didn't move. "My shift," she said, her voice stronger now, "is making sure people are treated right." The diner went completely still. Even Ben had stepped out from behind the counter, eyes wide, hands clenched. For a moment, it was just Lena and the sheriff, locked in a silent standoff. Garth's face hardened. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, so only she could hear. The words hit her like ice, but she met his stare and replied, "Maybe, but not today." Someone near the door pulled out a phone recording. The sheriff saw it, turned red, and stepped back. "Let's go," he muttered. storming out with more behind him. The bell over the door jingled, breaking the tension. Slowly, the diner began to breathe again. A woman whispered, "Good for her." Mr. Dawson clapped once softly. Ben exhaled in relief. Lena stood frozen, realizing her hands were shaking. She glanced at the man still sitting at the window. His coffee had gone cold, but he hadn't moved. His gaze met hers, calm, deep, and filled with something unfamiliar. Gratitude, maybe, or the flicker of a soul remembering what hope felt like. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice low but steady. Lena managed a faint smile. "Yeah," she replied, "I did." For a moment, neither of them looked away. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the town in silence. Inside, in that quiet diner, something small but powerful had shifted. It wasn't visible yet, but it was real, the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. By morning, the world had already decided who Lena Brooks was. The video taken inside Maple and Steam had spread across the internet overnight, shared by a tourist who happened to film the entire standoff. The caption read, "Waitress stands up to corrupt cops in small-town diner," and within hours, "Stand with Lena" trended across social media. At first, the attention felt unreal. People from all over the country commented with hearts and clapping emojis, calling her brave a symbol of moral courage. Reporters called the diner nonstop, wanting interviews. Maggie, the diner's owner, told her to ignore it and keep working. "It'll blow over, sweetheart," she said, flipping pancakes. But it didn't. Not in Willow Creek. Sheriff Garth saw the clip too. His face appeared in still frames everywhere, captioned with words like "abuse of power." The humiliation burned him. By noon, his patrol car was parked across the street from the diner, an unspoken warning. Lena tried to pretend it didn't bother her. She poured coffee-cleared tables and smiled through the whispers. Customers she'd known for years started avoiding her eyes. Some were proud old Mr. Dawson called her "our local hero." Others looked nervous, like being seen near her might bring trouble. Ben, her brother, scrolled through his phone that evening, eyes wide. He showed her the screen, hundreds of messages from strangers. "They love you," he signed. But mixed in with the praise were darker words. "She staged it. She's after fame. Hope she loses her job." It was the kind of cruelty that slithered in unseen until it poisoned the air. Lena shut the phone off, hands shaking. "It's just noise," she said, trying to convince herself more than Ben. The next day, the diner was busier than usual. People wanted to see the girl from the video. Some asked for selfies. Some wanted autographs on napkins. Lena laughed it off, but her stomach churned. This wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. By Friday, the tone had changed. The news trucks left the online crowd, found something new to argue about, and the diner emptied again. Only a few loyal customers remained. That's when the real backlash started. 2 men from the county inspection office showed up, clipboards in hand. "Routine check," they said, but everyone knew Garth had sent them. They cited the diner for small infractions, a cracked tile, a missing fire extinguisher tag. Maggie cursed under her breath. "He's playing dirty," she muttered. "Don't let him see you break." Lena nodded, but inside she felt the weight of being a target. Every time the bell above the door jingled, she flinched, expecting Garth or more to walk in again. One night, as she closed up, she found a note taped to the door, written in red marker, "You'll pay for embarrassing the law." She stood there in the cold, reading the words over and over, until Ben came running from the kitchen and tugged her sleeve. "Come inside," He signed his eyes wide with fear. She smiled weakly to reassure him, but her chest felt hollow. That night she couldn't sleep. The snowstorm outside howled against the windows, and every gust sounded like someone whispering her name. In the dark, her phone buzzed nonstop, with notifications, messages from strangers, reporters, and trolls. She threw it across the room. In the silence that followed, she realized how small her house felt. The next morning she walked to work, through the icy streets, her breath visible in the air. People she'd known all her life suddenly crossed to the other side of the road. Mrs. Keller from the bakery, who used to bring her leftover bread, looked away when Lena waved. Even Pastor Hill gave her a polite nod, but no smile. Hero one day, troublemaker the next. It was how Willow Creek worked. Ben met her at the diner signing fast. They teased me at school, said you're fake. She bent down signing back. They don't know the truth. Hold your head high. He nodded, but his eyes glistened. The day dragged on in silence. The booths were empty, the coffee burned, and the sound of the ticking clock filled every corner. At closing time, Lena locked the front door and leaned against the counter. The reflection of the neon sign outside flickered across her face, painting her in red and gold. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, she whispered. Ben looked up from wiping tables, catching the words. He set the cloth down and signed slowly, carefully, so she could see. You did right. Mom would be proud. The words hit her like a rush of warmth and grief all at once. She knelt and hugged him tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. It was just the two of them and the hum of the old refrigerator, steady and familiar. When she finally pulled away, Ben smiled faintly, his hands moving again. Good people make enemies too, he signed. She laughed softly, brushing his hair back. You sound just like her. They turned off the lights, the diner sinking into darkness, except for the glow of snow through the window. As they walked home, the town looked almost peaceful under the white blanket. But Lena knew better. The calm was only the pause before something worse. She didn't know what shape it would take, another inspection, a confrontation, or something she couldn't name. But she felt it waiting in the cold. Somewhere in the shadows of Willow Creek, someone was watching, and the price of standing up for a stranger was only beginning to unfold. The first thing Lena noticed that morning was the sound of the wind howling down Main Street, whistling through the cracks of the diner windows. The world outside was covered in a thin layer of frost, the kind that made Willow Creek look peaceful even when it wasn't. She pushed open the door to Maple and Steam and stopped. Sitting on the doormat was a plain brown package, edges damp from melted snow. No label, no return address, just her name written in careful block letters. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was a brand new espresso machine, gleaming under the fluorescent light. There was a note taped to it, typed on cream paper, "Keep serving with heart." You stood tall when others bowed. No signature. Lena stared at it for a long time, her breath fogging in the cold air. Maggie came in behind her, eyebrows lifting. "What's that?" Lena handed her the note. Maggie read it, her lips twitching into a knowing smile. "Guess somebody's got your back." "Yeah," Lena murmured, though the weight of the unknown sender unsettled her. She turned the card over, half expecting a name to appear, but the back was blank. Over the next few days, the mysterious gifts continued. A box of high-quality ingredients arrived, with a note that read, "For your kitchen." A grocery delivery showed up at her doorstep even though she hadn't ordered anything. Then on Friday, an envelope came in the mail addressed to her home. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000 and another typed message for your brother's education. Lena's hands trembled as she unfolded it. Her eyes burned with disbelief. Who would do this? The town had mostly turned against her. She thought of calling the bank, returning it, but something in her heart stopped her. It wasn't just money, it was faith arriving in plain envelopes when she had none left. She hid the check in her mother's old recipe box, under yellowed pages of cinnamon roll instructions written in cursive. That night she told Ben about it. He signed, "Maybe it's someone from the internet. They like you." She smiled but shook her head. "No, Benny, this feels close. Someone here." He frowned, confused, then hugged her tightly before running off to his room. The following Monday, the diner was quiet except for the sound of snow hitting the window. Lena wiped down the counter when the door opened, the bell jingling softly. The man in the black coat stepped in again. He looked cleaner now, rested, though his eyes still carried that deep tiredness. The scar near his temple caught the light as he removed his gloves. "Morning," he said simply. Lena froze for a beat, then nodded. "Coffee, please." She poured his usual and set it in front of him. "You're back. Seems that way." He smiled faintly, the first time she'd seen that expression on him. "Didn't plan to be gone long." She didn't reply right away. Something in his tone felt deliberate, as though he wanted to say more but didn't know how. After a long silence, she said, "You never told me your name." "Evan," he said, pausing slightly. "Evan Miller." The name felt too easy and too smooth, but she let it go. "I'm Lena," she said, even though he already knew. He nodded, as if the name meant something to him. They talked a little about the cold, about how the roads were slick that morning, about how small towns remember everything. His voice was calm, even the kind of voice that could make bad news sound bearable. But when the diner door opened again and Sheriff Garth walked in for his usual coffee, Evan's posture stiffened. He kept his eyes on the window, jaw tightening. Garth smirked when he saw him, then turned to Lena. "I see your new friend's back. Guess trouble likes company." Lena ignored him and refilled a pot of coffee. Garth sat down but didn't stop staring at Evan. "Some people don't learn their place," he said under his breath, just loud enough. Evan didn't respond. His silence was defiance enough. After the sheriff left, Lena walked over. "You okay?" He nodded, though his knuckles were white around the mug. "He's not used to people standing up to him," she said softly. "Neither am I," Evan replied, eyes distant. She tilted her head. "You mean you're not used to being defended?" He looked at her, then something fragile flickering behind his calm. "Both," he said. For a moment the noise of the diner fell away. Lena felt a strange connection pass between them, like two people recognizing the same scar. She didn't know what haunted him, but she saw it in his face, the same exhaustion she'd seen in her own reflection. When the clock struck 2, he stood leaving a $20 bill under his cup. "You don't have to tip like that," she said. "I know," he answered, "but sometimes people need to know they matter." Then he turned to leave. As the door swung shut behind him, the bell chimed once more, and Lena felt the space he left behind like a missing heartbeat. That night after closing, she sat at the counter alone, the diner dark, except for the red glow of the sign outside. She opened her mother's recipe box again, looked at the hidden check, and thought about the man named Evan Miller. the quiet stranger who spoke little but seemed to see right through her. For the first time in weeks, she felt something shift inside, small and tender, like a seed pushing through frozen ground. Maybe goodness had a way of finding its way back, even in a town that had forgotten how to believe in it. She didn't know who sent the gifts or why the stranger's voice lingered in her head, but deep down she felt that whatever was coming next would change everything. By late February, the snow around Willow Creek had turned to slush, and the Maple and Steam diner smelled faintly of damp coats and burnt toast. The days blurred together, but for Lena one thing had changed. The man who once sat silently by the window now came every few evenings, always after the lunch rush, when the diner was half empty and the air was thick with the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Evan Miller, as he called himself, had become a fixture of her day, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but filled the room all the same. He would order coffee, sometimes pie, if Ben had baked it, and talk with Lena about simple things. The taste of winter berries, the way the mountains looked when the light hit them right, or how Willow Creek seemed frozen in time. She found herself waiting for his visits, even if she told herself she wasn't. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, every word carried weight. One evening, as the snow began to fall again, Lena caught him staring at a family eating in the corner booth, a mother, father, and 2 laughing kids. His expression softened, then darkened like someone remembering a life that had vanished. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly. "You ever wish you could start over?" he asked suddenly. She wiped the counter, pretending to think. "Every day," she said, "but starting over doesn't erase what came before." "No," he said, his voice distant. "It doesn't." The next day, the diner was busier than usual, and Evan came later than normal. Garth was there, sitting at the counter, nursing his coffee like poison. His uniform was wrinkled, his pride even more so. He watched Lena and Evan interact with narrowed eyes. When Evan passed behind him to pay, Garth muttered, "Still hanging around, I thought drifters like you didn't stick in one place." Evan paused, calm but tense. "Just having coffee, Sheriff. You always say that," Garth said. "Makes me wonder what kind of trouble follows you." The room fell silent again. Lena's throat tightened. "Sheriff," she said, her tone sharp. "You've made your point. You should pick your company better, Lena," he said. "Bad things happen to people who don't." Then he left the door, slamming behind him, the sound echoing long after he was gone. Evan stood still for a long moment, staring at the door. "I should go," he said finally. "No," Lena said, stepping forward. "You shouldn't let him scare you off." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's not him I'm afraid of." Later that night, after closing, Lena found him outside, sitting on the bench near the diner window, snow piling on his coat. "You'll freeze out here," she said softly. He looked up at her, the street light painting his face in pale gold. "There's something you should know," he said. She hesitated. "Okay." He took a deep breath, his hands clasped together as if holding something fragile. "My name isn't Evan Miller." She frowned, confused. "Then what? It's Evan Rhodes." The name hit her like a gust of cold air. She knew it instantly. Everyone did. Rhodes Technologies. The company behind the self-driving car accident that had dominated headlines last year. The one that killed a woman and a child. She stared at him, unable to speak. "You're—" He nodded. "The CEO? Or I was." He looked down at his hands. The car that malfunctioned it was supposed to be the safest model ever built. My wife Emma was in it. She wanted to prove the technology was ready. She believed in what we were building, and I let her. His voice cracked slightly. The brakes failed. She died instantly. The snow fell harder now, the wind cutting through the silence. The media tore me apart, he continued, and they were right to. I disappeared, sold the company, left the city. I thought if I could live like a normal person again, maybe I'd find a way to stop hating myself. He gave a faint, bitter smile. But guilt doesn't care where you hide. Lena felt her throat tighten. She had seen the headlines, read the comments calling him a monster. And now here he was sitting outside her diner, a man stripped of everything except regret. "Why here?" she asked quietly. "Why Willow Creek?" "Because it's the kind of place where people still look each other in the eye," he said. "I thought if I could just exist among people who didn't know my name, I could start again." He looked at her, then eyes glistening. "That day you stood up for me, you didn't just defend a stranger. You reminded me that decency still exists." Lena felt tears sting her eyes. "You should have told me. Would you have treated me the same?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. He nodded as though her silence confirmed what he already knew. "I didn't want to be anyone's redemption story," he said softly. "I just wanted to feel human again." She sat beside him, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. For a while neither spoke. The street was quiet except for the sound of the diner's neon sign flickering above them. Finally she said, "I don't know what people said about you, and I don't care. What I saw that day wasn't a man who did something wrong. It was a man trying to disappear." He looked at her surprised. "You're not afraid of me?" She shook her head. "I think you've been punishing yourself enough." He let out a slow breath, his shoulders easing for the first time. "You're kinder than I deserve," maybe she said, smiling faintly, "but I don't think kindness is about deserving." A small laugh escaped him, then soft and hoarse. The kind of laugh that sounded like it hadn't been used in a long time. They sat in silence as the snow fell around them, two broken souls in a town that never forgot finding warmth in the space between words. When he finally stood, he looked at her with something new in his eyes. Not guilt, not grief, but something fragile and uncertain, like hope. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not asking me to leave." She smiled through the misty cold. "You can have coffee here any time, Mr. Rhodes." He chuckled softly. "Evan," he corrected. "Just Evan." Then he walked away, down the snow-lined street, disappearing into the fog as the diner's lights flickered behind him, leaving Lena standing in the doorway, her breath forming clouds in the cold, her heart unsure whether it had just broken or begun to heal. March arrived with gray skies and slush melting into the gutters, the kind of weather that made everything feel like it was waiting for something to change. The Maple and Steam Diner had grown quieter each week, the bell above the door ringing less often. Maggie, the owner, had been coughing for days, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. "Just winter air," she said, but her skin looked pale, her breath short. Lena worked double shifts, trying to keep the place running. Evan still came by, sometimes helping her carry supplies, sometimes sitting in silence at his usual booth by the window. There was a calmness between them now, a quiet understanding. But one night, as Lena wiped down the counter, her phone rang. It was Maggie's daughter, her voice trembling. Maggie had collapsed at home. By morning, the news spread through Willow Creek. Maggie had suffered a stroke. She was alive but weak, the doctor saying she might never return to work. Lena sat in the diner's empty kitchen, the scent of coffee heavy around her, staring at the unpaid bills stacked by the register. Without Maggie, the diner couldn't stay open. It wasn't just a job, it was home, the last safe place she and Ben had. That evening, as snow began to fall again, Evan walked in. She didn't greet him this time. He could see the heaviness in her face. "Maggie," he asked. She nodded, eyes glassy. "She's in the hospital. They don't think she'll come back." He sat down quietly. "I'm sorry," he said. "She loves this place," Lena whispered. "It's all she's built. I can't let it die." She rubbed her temples, exhaustion creeping through her bones. "But there's no money, no backup plan. I can't even pay next month's lease." Evan looked at her for a long time, his jaw tightening as if he was fighting an internal decision. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out a white envelope, sliding it across the counter. "What's this?" she asked. "Has something to keep the doors open?" She frowned, shaking her head. "Evan, I can't take money from you." "You didn't save me for money," he said gently. "And I'm not giving this out of pity. You gave me faith when I had none. Let me give you a dream." The words hung in the air like a promise too big to touch. Lena hesitated, then tore open the envelope. Inside was a letterhead that read RT Holdings and a set of legal documents transferring ownership of the diner, free and clear, to her name. Her breath caught. "What is this?" "It's your diner now," he said. "Everything's been handled. Taxes, lease permits. You won't owe a dime." "Evan," she whispered, tears forming. "I can't accept this. It's too much." He smiled faintly. "It's not charity, Lena. It's purpose. You gave me a reason to believe in something good again. Let me do the same." She stared at him, the papers trembling in her hands. "You can't just buy people's lives back." "I'm not buying," he said softly. "I'm returning what I owe the world." Her tears fell before she could stop them. "Why me?" she asked. He looked down, voice low. "Because you didn't see a billionaire. You saw a man. No one's done that for me in a long time." For a moment, neither spoke. The diner was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She wanted to argue, to push it all back, but something inside her gave way. For the first time in months, she let herself feel hope again. That night, after Evan left, she sat at Maggie's usual booth, staring at the documents under the yellow light. She could almost hear Maggie's laughter echoing in her head. "If you love something enough, fight for it, kid." The next morning, Lena visited Maggie at the hospital, holding her hand gently. "I'll keep the diner going," she said. "I promise." Maggie smiled weakly, her voice thin. "Make it yours, sweetheart. Make it mean something." When Lena returned to the diner, she hung a small sign in the window, closed for renovation. Over the next weeks, she poured every hour into bringing it back to life. She scrubbed the floors, painted the walls, repaired the flickering neon sign. Ben helped design a new logo, a steaming coffee cup shaped like a heart. They renamed it Heart and Steam Cafe, a tribute to what the place had always been about heart and hard work. The town watched from a distance, curious but hesitant. Some whispered that she had a secret investor, others that she was trying to profit from fame. Lena ignored them all. She worked late into the night, her hands raw, her back, aching, driven by something stronger than fear. Evan showed up quietly, sleeves rolled, helping her patch a leak in the kitchen or fix a broken light. He didn't talk much about himself, and she didn't press him. What mattered was the silence between them that didn't feel empty anymore. One evening, as they were cleaning up, Ben played music from his phone, a soft jazz melody filling the diner. Lena laughed when Evan started humming along. "Didn't peg you for a jazz guy," she teased. He smiled. "You'd be surprised what you find when you stop running." The words lingered in her chest longer than the song itself. Weeks passed and the renovation neared completion. The walls glowed a warm cream color, the booths reupholstered in deep red, the air filled with the scent of fresh paint and cinnamon. Heart and Steam Cafe looked nothing like the tired diner it once was. It felt alive again. One night while Lena stood outside, locking up, she saw Evan across the street. Hands in his pockets, watching the light from the sign reflect in the snow. "You know," she called out, "if you keep lurking out there, people will think you're casing the place." He grinned, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Maybe I just like the view." "The cafe or the person?" she asked playfully. He tilted his head. "Both." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt seen not as a waitress or a town scandal, but as herself. The night air smelled like new beginnings. The next morning, the Heart and Steam Cafe opened its doors for the first time under her name. The first customers were hesitant, then more came drawn by curiosity. Locals, travelers, even a few faces who had once turned away. Lena moved through the crowd with quiet grace, serving coffee, smiling, and thanking each person as though they were family. When she looked up, Evan was sitting at his usual table, coffee in hand, watching her with quiet pride. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world felt right. In the reflection of the window, she saw herself not as the girl who defied the sheriff or the viral headline, but as a woman who had turned pain into purpose. Somewhere deep down, she knew this was only the beginning, but for now it was enough. The diner had been reborn, and so had she. By spring, Willow Creek began to thaw, and with it so did the hearts of the people who had once turned cold toward Lena Brooks. Heart and Steam Cafe had been open for barely a month, but already it felt like a second sunrise for the town. The new sign glowed warm gold against the brick wall steam curling from the painted heart, just as it did from the real mugs inside. The aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon sugar spilled into the street every morning, drawing people in. Before they even realized they were hungry, Lena arrived before dawn each day, opening the door to the sound of Ben's laughter echoing from the kitchen. He had learned to communicate with the new staff, a pair of young men from the shelter outside of town, using the sign language she had taught him. They moved in sync like a family that had always belonged together. Lena paid them fairly, fed them more than she could afford, and told them often, "You matter here." Word spread, and soon Heart and Steam became more than a cafe. It was a haven for those who needed a warm meal, a place to sit, or just a moment of kindness without questions. Local teens came by after school to do homework. Old folks played cards by the window, and Maggie, now recovering, slowly came in twice a week with her walker to sit at her old corner table and sip tea. "You made it beautiful, sweetheart," she'd say, her voice cracking with pride. Lena would smile and squeeze her hand, answering softly, "You built the bones. I just added the heart." Evan continued to show up quietly, blending into the background, but always helping where needed. Some nights he washed dishes, other times he fixed a broken chair or brewed a perfect cup of coffee without being asked. The regulars didn't know who he really was. To them, he was just the quiet man who always helped and never asked for anything in return. But to Lena he had become something deeper, an anchor steady and constant even when she tried to pretend otherwise. One afternoon after the lunch rush, Evan brought in a box of small books journals bound in brown leather. For your customers, he said, placing them on the counter. To write whatever they feel. Maybe someone will need to leave something behind. She flipped through one of them, smiling. You're turning my cafe into a confession booth. Maybe, he said with a small grin, but sometimes people just need to be heard, even if no one's listening. They called it the kindness shelf, and within a week, the notebooks were filled with messages. Thank yous, prayers, apologies, and hopes. One woman wrote about how her son finally got sober. A child wrote, "This is where my mom smiles again." Lena read the entries at night when the cafe was empty, tears slipping down her cheeks as she realized how much one small place could matter. The town began to change with it. People who hadn't spoken in years started talking again. The mayor stopped by for coffee one morning and left a donation envelope to support Lena's idea of hosting free dinners once a month for families in need. Even Sheriff Garth, still nursing his bruised pride, came in once silent and stiff. He ordered black coffee and left a 20 on the table without saying a word. Lena didn't thank him. She just nodded, and for the first time his eyes didn't hold malice, only the faintest flicker of remorse. On the cafe wall, Ben painted a mural, a sprawling design of hands passing coffee cups, from one to another, each hand a different shade and shape. Above it, in bold letters, he wrote, "Kindness tastes better than coffee." Customers loved it. People began taking pictures, tagging Nari, Heart, and Steam on social media, and once again, Lena's name started circulating online. But this time the comments were filled with gratitude. "She's the reason our town is kind again," one post said. She read that and felt her chest tighten, not from pride, but from disbelief. Every act of goodness had rippled outward, and she realized she wasn't just rebuilding a diner. She was rebuilding faith in herself, in people, in the world. One night, Evan stayed after closing to help her count receipts. The cafe was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. Lena leaned against the counter, exhausted but smiling. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. The company, the city, the noise. He thought for a long time before answering. Sometimes he said softly, "But not the person I was there." "You could go back, you know," she said. "People would listen to you again." He looked at her eyes steady. "I'd rather stay somewhere I can listen instead." She didn't respond, but her heart swelled painfully in her chest. Outside, the street lamps reflected off wet pavement, and through the window, she saw their reflections standing side by side, the waitress who refused to stay silent, and the billionaire who learned to live quietly. For a long time, neither moved. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was gentle. "You've done so much for me, Evan, for this town. You don't have to keep proving anything." He smiled faintly. "I'm not proving anything. I'm just staying where I found peace." As she watched him gather his coat, Lena realized what frightened her most wasn't losing the cafe. It was the thought of him walking out of her life one day. But she said nothing. Some feelings were too fragile to name. As weeks turned into months, Heart and Steam thrived. Lena started a small community board by the entrance, where people could post job offers, local needs, and thank you notes. It became a patchwork of hope, handwritten messages, photos of lost pets returned home, and drawings by children who said they wanted to work there someday. Even Maggie called it the soul of Willow Creek. The day the cafe reached its 100th customer, since reopening, Lena baked a pie shaped like a heart and gave free slices to everyone. Ben laughed, flour-streaked on his cheek, and Evan lifted his coffee in a silent toast. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of laughter and the smell of sugar and steam, Lena felt something she hadn't in years: peace. She stood at the counter, watching Evan talk with Ben in their awkward mix of words and signs, and thought, maybe this is what it means to start over. Not to erase the past, but to build something beautiful from what's left of it. Outside, the evening sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the cafe windows in gold. The sign flickered softly above the door, Heart and Steam Cafe. Beneath it, written in small script, were words Lena had added that morning without telling anyone. It read, "A love served daily." She smiled at the sight, not knowing that the next storm, waiting beyond that golden horizon, would test everything she had built. But for now, hope was enough. Summer came early to Willow Creek, and Heart and Steam Cafe was thriving. The hum of conversation filled the air, the windows wide open, to let in the scent of wildflowers from the valley. Lena had stopped counting customers. Now it was the laughter. She counted the easy, unguarded kind that meant people felt safe again. She didn't notice the danger creeping in, not until it was too late. It started with a single photo posted online without context. A travel blogger passing through town had taken a picture of Evan, standing outside the cafe holding a cup of coffee, the sunlight catching the familiar angle of his face. The caption read, "Kind stranger, great cafe, small town charm." Within hours, someone recognized him, Evan Rhodes, billionaire founder of Rhodes Technologies, disgraced CEO. The internet did what it always does, it devoured the story. By morning, Lena woke to dozens of messages, her phone vibrating until she silenced it. When she checked, her heart dropped. Billionaire in hiding, found in small Colorado town. The waitress who stole a CEO's heart. Is this a publicity stunt? She scrolled until the words blurred. Photos of her smiling behind the counter were plastered on gossip blogs. People dissected every detail, her clothes, her face, her story. The comments tore into her like knives. She played the victim for attention. She knew who he was all along. She's using him for money. She felt sick. Outside, the cafe looked the same, but inside everything had changed. Reporters showed up by noon, parking their vans along Main Street. They shoved microphones toward her as she tried to unlock the door. "Miss Brooks, are you in a relationship with Evan Rhodes? Did you know he was hiding here? Are you benefiting from his wealth?" The noise was unbearable. Ben tried to shield her, but she could see fear flicker in his eyes. Evan arrived minutes later, stepping between her and the cameras. "That's enough," he said firmly, voice steady. "Leave her out of this." The crowd only grew louder. "Mr. Rhodes, is she your girlfriend? Are you buying her silence?" He guided Lena inside, shutting the door behind them, the cafe suddenly feeling too small. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She shook her head, pacing. "Sorry, Evan, they're tearing me apart out there. Everything I worked for, it's turning into a circus." He took a slow breath. "I should have told you sooner. I knew something like this could happen." She turned to him, eyes filled with anger and heartbreak. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," he said, voice soft but pained. "I just wanted to live without being him, without people seeing the money before the man. And now I'm paying the price for it," she whispered. the cafe been my reputation? Everything is on the line. The phone rang nonstop, customers canceled catering orders, and sponsors who once praised her withdrew their support. The cafe emptied again, this time not from silence, but from judgment. That night, after they locked up, Lena stood behind the counter, staring at the darkened street. "I can't be the reason people hate you again," she said finally. "You're not the reason," he replied, his tone breaking for the first time. "You're the reason I can breathe again." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This isn't fair. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to run a cafe." "And you did," he said gently. "You built something beautiful. Don't let them take it from you." "Then go," she said, her voice trembling. "Go before they ruin it more." His silence was unbearable. He stepped closer, searching her face, as if memorizing every line. "If that's what you want," he said. "It's what's best," she whispered. "For both of us." He hesitated, then nodded once, his eyes heavy with a sadness that felt ancient. "You once said kindness isn't about deserving," he murmured. "You were right. But I don't think I'll ever deserve you, Lena." And then he was gone, the bell over the door giving one soft jingle that echoed long after he disappeared into the night. The following days blurred into exhaustion. The cafe stayed open, but it was quiet again, too quiet. Maggie tried to comfort her, telling her that storms pass. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this one would destroy everything. She avoided the news, but even without watching, she knew the headlines hadn't stopped. Reporters camped near the street corners, hoping for another glimpse of the waitress and the billionaire. Each morning, Lena swept the sidewalk and pretended she didn't see them. Ben stopped going to school for a few days after someone vandalized his locker with the word "Gold Digger's Brother." Lena held him that night, whispering apologies he couldn't hear. "We'll be okay," she signed, but her hands shook so badly, the letters blurred. Days turned into weeks, and Evan didn't return. No messages, no letters. It was as if he'd vanished again, the same way he had entered her life quietly, completely. And yet every time she passed his empty booth, she felt it the echo of something unfinished. She replayed his last words in her head until they became a heartbeat. "You're the reason I can breathe again." One evening, as the sky darkened over the mountains, she closed the cafe early. The street outside was empty, except for the soft hum of the streetlights. She looked up at the golden glow of the heart and steam sign and whispered, "You gave me faith, Evan. Don't let the world take it from you." Her voice cracked in the stillness, but saying it aloud made her feel lighter, even if no one heard. In the silence that followed, she realized something simple and painful. Love wasn't about being seen by the world. It was about the small moments that no one recorded, the quiet courage to care when everything around you falls apart. And somewhere far away, under the same night sky, Evan Rhodes stared out at the city lights from a hotel balcony, a folded photo of the cafe in his hand, the words she once said to him replaying in his memory like a promise he wasn't ready to break. "My shift is making sure people are treated right." He smiled faintly through the ache. For the first time since leaving Willow Creek, he knew exactly what he had to do. The storm rolled in without warning, swallowing the horizon in a wall of gray. By afternoon, rain hammered the roofs of Willow Creek with a fury the town hadn't seen in decades. Rivers swelled into streets, wind howled through the alleyways, and thunder cracked above like the sky itself was breaking apart. The radio in Heart and Steam Cafe warned of flash floods near the old dam, but Lena stayed refusing to close until every customer had found a way home. Go, she urged the last pair of teenagers lingering by the mural. Now. Ben locked the door behind them, his face pale with worry. The dam, he signed frantically. They said it might break. It's fine, Lena answered, trying to sound sure. But the truth hung heavy in the air, the kind that makes your stomach twist before the world falls apart. Moments later, a deep rumble shook the ground. The lights flickered, then died. Outside, a sound like tearing earth roared through the valley. The dam had broken. Water poured down the mountain, devouring everything in its path. Lena grabbed Ben's arm, yelling over the noise. "We have to get upstairs." He nodded, his eyes wide, but when they ran for the stairs, a crash split the front window. Water surged in cold and merciless sweeping chairs, and dishes into a chaos of wood and glass. Ben stumbled, and Lena pulled him up, gripping his arm as they fought their way toward the back. The cafe they had built with love and sweat was disappearing under a tide of muddy water. "Go," she screamed, pushing him toward the staircase. He shook his head, trying to sign something, but she couldn't see, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except hold him tighter. Then another crashwood splintering. A section of the ceiling collapsed, sending debris into the swirling flood. "Please," she begged, her voice raw. "Go, Ben." He hesitated, tears streaming down his face, before finally climbing. She followed, but her foot slipped on a floating chair, her head striking the counter. The world went dim for a heartbeat. When she opened her eyes, the water was higher, the current stronger. Ben was screaming silently from the stairs, his hands flailing for her. She tried to stand, but her legs screamed with pain. Then above the thunder, another sound, a voice she hadn't heard in weeks. Lena. She turned toward the doorway, barely visible through the rain. Evan stood there, soaked to the bone, flashlight in hand, waiting through the torrent. His eyes found hers, wild with fear. "Hold on, Ben, he's upstairs," she shouted. "Go!" He shook his head. "Not without you." He fought his way forward, slipping on the flooded floor. "You shouldn't be here," she cried. "You left, I came back," he shouted over the storm. "I wasn't going to let you face this alone." The water surged again, lifting her off her feet. Evan lunged, catching her just before she hit the counter. "You saved me once," he said through gritted teeth, his arms tight around her. "Let me save you now." He half carried, half dragged her up the stairs as the water swallowed the first floor. Ben reached down, pulling her hand while Evan pushed from behind. When they finally reached the top landing, they collapsed in a heap, gasping for air. The cafe below was gone, just a churning sea of debris. Lightning flashed, illuminating Evan's face, streaked with mud and rain. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, tears mixing with the storm. "You could have died." He smiled faintly, brushing wet hair from her face. Then at least it would have meant something. A section of the roof groaned. Water was rising through the floorboards now. They had to move again. Evan found a small attic hatch and forced it open, pushing Ben up first, then helping Lena through. The three of them huddled under the slanted roof as the wind screamed outside. "The cafe," Lena murmured, staring through a crack in the boards. "It's gone." Evan took her hand. "Things can be rebuilt. People can't." She looked at him, her chest aching. "You came back." "I never really left," he said quietly. For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the storm destroy everything they'd worked for. The cafe that had become a symbol of hope was now nothing but dark water and broken wood. Lena pressed her forehead to her knees, shaking. "It's all gone," she whispered. "All of it." "No," Evan said firmly. "Not all. As long as you're here, it's still alive." His words broke something open in her, and she sobbed into his chest, grief and relief blending into one. Ben curled up beside them, clutching her arm, eyes shut tight. Hours passed before the storm began to weaken. When dawn came, the sky was bruised purple and gold. The floodwaters had receded enough for them to climb down. The cafe was unrecognizable. A shell filled with mud tables overturned the mural, smeared into ghostly colors. Lena stood in the doorway, trembling her breath, visible in the cold air. Evan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We'll fix it," he said. "Together." She turned to him, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "You don't have to." "I know," he said softly, "but I want to." In that broken, rain-soaked silence, something new was born, not from perfection, but from survival. The Heart and Steam Cafe was gone, but what it had stood for wasn't. As they walked down Main Street, the townspeople emerged from their homes dazed but alive. Some had lost everything. Some had nothing but each other. Lena looked at Evan and saw what he had done, risked his life to come back to save them, to prove that redemption wasn't a word but a choice. He caught her gaze, and in that look she saw everything unspoken forgiveness, love and the fragile promise of another beginning. The storm had taken so much, but as they stood hand in hand beneath the clearing sky, Lena realized it had also given her the one thing she thought she'd lost forever: faith. The days after the flood blurred together in mud and exhaustion. Willow Creek looked like a ghost town, its streets lined with broken fences, waterlogged cars, and the faint smell of earth that had been ripped open. But amidst the ruin, people moved with quiet determination. Neighbors helped neighbors, strangers became family, and through it all, Lena worked tirelessly, her clothes stained and her hands raw. Heart and Steam Cafe was nothing but shattered wood and memory, yet she refused to let it die. Every morning she swept the mud from its doorway as if it could still be saved. Ben helped her painting boards with bright colors that read, "We'll be back." Evan was everywhere at the shelter, hauling supplies, leading crews to rescue trapped livestock, repairing roofs with bare hands. The townspeople didn't know who he really was, not yet, but they knew one thing: he was the man who came back when everything fell apart. For Lena, his presence was a quiet anchor. He never talked about what had happened between them before the storm. He just worked beside her, steady and wordless, his eyes always soft when they met hers. Weeks passed, and slowly, Willow Creek began to breathe again. Donations came from nearby towns, and a local news crew arrived to film the recovery. They asked to interview Lena, saying her cafe had become a symbol of hope. She hesitated, but Evan encouraged her. "People need your voice," he said gently. "You remind them what rebuilding looks like." She nodded, though her heart trembled. The interview aired that weekend, showing clips of her handing out sandwiches, cleaning debris, and laughing despite the chaos. Her words were simple but powerful. "When you lose everything, kindness becomes your foundation. We can build again if we build with love." The video spread, and for the first time, the internet wasn't cruel, it was inspired. Letters poured in, donations flooded her mailbox, and volunteers drove from miles away just to help rebuild Heart and Steam. But the truth about Evan couldn't stay hidden forever. It started as a whisper, then a headline: Billionaire Evan Rhodes spotted helping rebuild Willow Creek. Photos followed him carrying lumber, standing beside Lena, smiling in the background of news reports. The same media that had once crucified him now called it a redemption story. Some praised him, others doubted his sincerity, but this time the noise didn't matter. The town knew the truth of what he had done. They had seen him wade through floodwater to save lives. They had seen him rebuild without cameras or credit. When reporters arrived again, Lena faced them alone. "Yes, he's here," she said calmly. "And if you're here to turn kindness into a headline, you can leave. But if you want to see what grace looks like, stay and help." It was the first time she saw fear in the reporters' eyes, not of her, but of the mirror she held up to them. That evening, Evan stood behind her as she locked the cafe's new doors, freshly rebuilt, with the help of half the town. "You didn't have to defend me," he said quietly. "I did," she answered. "You once told me I reminded you that good people still exist. You reminded me that they still can change." He smiled faintly, a sadness flickering in his gaze. "I don't know if I can ever undo what happened before." She turned to him, eyes steady. "Redemption isn't undoing Evan, it's staying." He looked at her, then really looked as if seeing the whole map of their story. The diner, the storm, the silence, and the return. The next morning, the mayor announced a town gathering to thank those who had helped with the recovery. The community center overflowed with people, volunteers, firefighters, shop owners, and families who had lost everything, yet somehow found hope again. Lena sat near the back, exhausted but content. When the mayor called Evan's name, she looked up in surprise. He stood from his seat, smoothing his shirt, and walked to the stage. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they recognized him, but instead of anger, there was respect. He didn't use a microphone. His voice carried on its own. "Months ago I came here trying to disappear," he began. "I thought I could outrun guilt. I thought hiding from the world would make me smaller than my mistakes. But this town, this cafe, this woman." His eyes found Lena, and she froze where she sat, her breath caught. "They taught me that hiding doesn't heal anything. Facing it does. And kindness, real kindness, doesn't care who you were before. It just asks who you're willing to become." The crowd was silent, every face turned toward him. "There's one person who deserves to be standing here instead of me," he continued. "A woman who stood up when others stayed silent, who gave hope to strangers and turned a small-town diner into the heart of a community. Lena Brooks reminded me what humanity looks like." He paused, voice breaking slightly. "She didn't just save a stranger that day. She saved a man who had forgotten what it meant to live." The room erupted in applause. People stood clapping, some even crying. Lena pressed her hands over her mouth, tears spilling freely. When he stepped down, she met him halfway. "You didn't have to say that," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I wanted to," he said simply, "because it's true." She hugged him then, in front of everyone without hesitation. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet and full of everything that had gone unsaid for months. The crowd around them cheered louder, not for a billionaire or a waitress, but for something they all understood: love that had survived the storm. In the days that followed, the story spread again, but this time it wasn't twisted. Headlines read, "The town that rebuilt together, heart and steam, rises again, and a billionaire finds his redemption in a small cafe." Donations poured in for the town's rebuilding fund, and Evan used his resources to establish a long-term foundation for flood relief under Lena's name, calling it the Heart Fund. When she found out, she scolded him with tears in her eyes. "You can't keep naming things after me," he smiled. "Then stop being the reason good things happen." She threw a towel at him, laughing for the first time in days. That night, as the cafe closed, the last customer left a note on the counter that read, "You reminded us that love stays." Lena folded it and kept it in her pocket, knowing she'd never forget those words. As she locked the door, Evan waited outside under the streetlight, hands in his pockets. That same small smile she had come to love. "You know," he said, "when I first walked into that diner, I thought it was the end of everything." She tilted her head, smiling softly. Maybe it was just the beginning. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "You rebuilt a town, Lena, but more than that, you rebuilt me." The wind blew softly through the street, carrying the faint scent of rain and coffee. The town that had once whispered about them now watched with quiet pride, because everyone in Willow Creek knew what they had witnessed wasn't scandal or luck, it was grace. And as Lena leaned her head against his shoulder, the neon glow of heart and steam shimmered in the reflection of the wet pavement, steady and alive, just like the love that refused to leave. A year later, Willow Creek no longer looked like the town that once drowned. The streets were freshly paved, flower boxes bloomed under every window, and laughter floated through the air like it had been waiting for permission to return. At the center of it all stood Heart and Steam Cafe, glowing softly under its golden sign. The walls inside were painted cream and honey, the mural restored and expanded, hands still passing cups to one another, but now with a small inscription at the bottom, "Love poured gently." Every morning Lena arrived before sunrise, unlocking the door to the smell of roasted beans and warm sugar. The cafe had become the pulse of the town, a place where no one was turned away, and every cup came with a piece of comfort. She moved through the space like she was part of its rhythm, greeting regulars by name, laughing with teenagers who helped after school, hugging old neighbors who still thanked her for what she'd built. On one corner wall hung framed photos of the flood and the rebuilding, the town's reminder that beauty could grow from ruin. At the counter sat a small brass plaque that read, "Kindness tastes better than coffee," Ben's phrase immortalized. He was away now studying graphic design at a university in Denver, funded by a scholarship from the Rhodes Kindness Fund. He sent her sketches of logos, new mural ideas, and short videos of him, signing "Proud of you, sis," in his dorm room. Sometimes she'd watch them late at night when the cafe was quiet and the air hummed with memory. Evan had kept his promise to stay. He rented a small cottage on the edge of town, trading boardrooms and city lights for pine trees and silence. He spent his days running the Heart Fund, quietly channeling resources into communities recovering from disasters, never putting his name on the donations. People still recognized him sometimes, but he never minded now. "It keeps me honest," he liked to say. He worked from the back corner of the cafe, most mornings laptop open, coffee, half drunk, his eyes occasionally lifting to watch Lena move through the room. Sometimes when she caught him looking, he'd smile that same small smile, the one that said everything without needing words. The townspeople had grown used to them by now. They were no longer the billionaire and the waitress, just Evan and Lena. Two people who had been through the storm and decided to stay in its calm together. The cafe had expanded into something larger than either of them imagined. On weekends, it hosted free workshops, cooking lessons for single parents, sign language classes taught by Ben on visits home, and small concerts by local musicians. At night, fairy lights twinkled across the windows, and couples danced between tables when the jukebox played old love songs. People called it the soul of Willow Creek, and Lena never corrected them, though she always whispered a quiet thank you to Maggie, who had started it all. The older woman had passed that winter peacefully in her sleep, her last words to Lena still etched in her memory. You were always meant to make something beautiful. On the morning of the cafe's one-year anniversary, since reopening, the town held a celebration. The square was filled with stalls and laughter children chasing balloons, while a band played on a small stage. Lena moved through the crowd with flour still on her apron, greeting people, her cheeks flushed from joy. She spotted Evan near the fountain, talking with the mayor, a faint trace of pride softening his features. When he noticed her, his expression shifted so subtle that only she would see it, the quiet awe of a man who still couldn't believe she'd chosen him. Later, when the sun dipped behind the mountains, the crowd gathered outside the cafe. The golden sign flickered to life as Lena stepped up to speak the same nervous energy she'd felt a year ago returning. Heart and steam was born from a flood. She began, her voice carrying over the hush, not just of water, but of loss, fear, and change. We thought we'd lost everything, but we hadn't. What survived was what mattered most: kindness, community, and the courage to love again. This cafe isn't just mine, it's ours. The crowd erupted in applause, and when she looked down, Evan was there, clapping, eyes shining with quiet pride. Afterward, as the square emptied and lights dimmed, Lena lingered by the door, sweeping crumbs from the steps. Evan joined her, his sleeves rolled, his voice low. You always did know how to make a town believe again. She smiled. You helped. I just followed your lead, he said. She turned to him, then her heart full of everything they had survived, the fear, the loss, the forgiveness, the love that had grown, slowly but deeply. Do you ever miss it? She asked softly. The noise, the power, the spotlight. He thought for a long moment, his gaze on the mountains fading into night. No, he said finally, because I found something louder here. What's that? She asked, teasing. He met her eyes. Peace. The word settled between them like the final note of a song. Inside, the lights glowed dim, casting a halo through the window. Come on, she said, opening the door. One last cup before closing. They sat together at the counter, steam curling between them, the world outside quiet, except for the faint chorus of crickets. You know, he said, after a long silence, you never told me what you wanted in return for that day. She looked up, pretending not to remember. What day? The diner. When you stood up to the sheriff. When you saved me. Her smile faded into something softer. I didn't want anything. There must have been something, he said, his voice a whisper. She looked down at her cup, her reflection trembling in the coffee. Just that you'd be okay, she said. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter between them, a simple gold ring, slightly worn, glinting under the light. This once symbolized love lost, he said quietly. I want it to symbolize love found if you'll have it. Her breath caught. For a moment, the world seemed to still, the ticking clock, the hum of the lights, even the air itself pausing as her eyes met his. "You don't owe me anything, Evan," she whispered. He smiled, eyes soft and sure. "I don't," he said, "but I want to spend the rest of my life proving it anyway." The tears came before she could stop them. She covered her mouth, laughing through the ache in her chest. "You're really bad at keeping surprises," she said, her voice trembling. "Then say yes before I ruin another one," he teased gently. She nodded, unable to speak, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all along. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain through the open window, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly gentle. This time almost like a memory of the storm that had once tried to take everything from them. Evan stood pulling her into his arms. She fit there easily, like she had always belonged. He kissed her forehead, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know what I realized," what she asked. "Love doesn't come in the calm," he said. "It finds you in the storm when you're too broken to look for it." She smiled through her tears. "Then I guess we were meant to find each other in the flood." He laughed quietly, holding her closer as the rain began to fall again, tapping gently on the roof like applause from the sky. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in warmth and silence, until the cafe clock chimed midnight. Tomorrow the world would continue, customers to serve, lives to rebuild, kindness to pour. But tonight the world had narrowed to two hearts beating in rhythm, under a sign that glowed softly against the dark. Outside, the streets shimmered with rainlight, and through the window the golden letters reflected in the puddles, Heart and Steam Cafe. Love served daily. It wasn't a fairy tale, not really. It was something stronger, ordinary, grounded, true. And as Lena leaned her head against Evan's chest, she knew that the love they had built wasn't the kind that burned quickly. It was the kind that stayed slow and steady, poured gently into each new day. In the quiet hum of that small-town cafe, love didn't need to be shouted. It was there in the laughter, the warmth, the second chances, and in the man who had walked into her life as a stranger and stayed as her home. Sometimes the people we protect end up saving us. Sometimes the storms that break us teach us how to love again. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is a single act of courage, served with a cup of coffee and a heart brave enough to believe. If this story touched something deep inside, you take a moment to breathe and let it settle. Because stories like this aren't just fiction, they're mirrors of what love, courage, and redemption can look like in real life. Sometimes the people who walk into our lives quietly without fanfare or promise end up changing everything we thought we knew about kindness and connection. Lena didn't know that defending a stranger would alter the course of her life. But that's how love often begins. Not in grand gestures, but in small moments of humanity, when we choose to do what's right instead of what's easy. Maybe you've had a moment like that too, when your heart told you to stand up, to speak out, to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. Maybe that act didn't make headlines, but it mattered. It always matters. Because love, real love, starts with compassion. And sometimes it arrives disguised as a stranger in need. So tonight, wherever you are, whether you're sitting in a quiet kitchen with a cup of coffee, driving home under the rain, or lying in bed with your heart still caught in the story, remember this: there is strength in gentleness and beauty, in the kind of love that grows from courage. The world can feel harsh, cynical, or loud, but every time you choose kindness, you're rewriting that story. You're proving that light still exists. And if you're someone who has ever lost faith in love, maybe Lena and Evan's journey can remind you that it's never truly gone. It just waits for the right time to return. Poured slowly, gently, patiently, like warmth in a cold room. If this story moved, you hit that like button, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to join our growing family of hearts, who crave stories that heal, inspire, and make you feel alive again. Drop a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from tonight? Are you in a cozy town like Willow Creek or a bustling city that never sleeps? Let's fill the comments with hope, love, and stories of your own. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded that kindness still wins, and love, the kind that starts quietly, bravely, and unexpectedly, is always worth believing in.